Hey, what's up guys? We're going to talk about something fun today. Let's talk about megapixels. This has been interesting since the very beginning of digital cameras, and it will continue to stay interesting for a long time. Now, I did want to mention in the early days of digital cameras, even for the first couple years when enthusiasts started picking them up and having decent DSLRs, they weren't really being used by the professionals at that time because the quality, even being decent, wasn't quite good enough for major client work and stock photography and all that fun stuff. So really, even up until 2004, 5, something like that, it just wasn't something that was being done. Now, I wanted to start off by mentioning that any camera over the last 10 years or so is going to be just fine if your only use is going to be small images on a cell phone, possibly even looking at them on a computer screen, that sort of thing. It's really not going to matter what camera you've used over many years. Now, from the very beginning, there's always been that one guy in the corner saying, oh, you'll never need more than 5 or 10 megapixels or whatever the deal is. And then a couple years later, you need more, you need more, you need more, etc. And part of that has also been the industry's push to try to sell more cameras, to outdo themselves on their last model, to try to push more sales. And so they've always touted these high resolutions. Oh, look, we've got 15 megapixels, buy our new camera. And that served them very well in the beginning of the digital revolution because they were able to quickly push the envelope more and more. And eventually they're going to hit a little bit of a plateau where those types of gains will slow down a bit. Now, the first thing I wanted to mention, of course, is that megapixel count is not an adequate indicator of quality. You can have resolution on a new iPhone that is way more than an older DSLR. However, the images from the DSLR may be better, and so you need to really look at more than that. You need to look at the way the signals are processed from the camera, etc., etc. So the thing that we really want to look at is not how well an image can display on a computer screen, but actually how you're going to use those images in the real world. Of course, nowadays we do have really large screens that we use, and so they can come to be a factor when you're looking at images on large television screens or projectors, etc., etc. However, what I really want to concentrate today on is prints. So I wanted to mention that pretty much any camera is going to be just fine on a small print. That's pretty much anything under around an 8x12. You should be able to get a decent quality out of pretty much anything for that purpose, with the exception of some cell phone cameras if they're older, that sort of thing. Now, the issue comes when you step up to around a medium-sized print, which is, in my opinion, I'm going to call that around a 12 by 18 inch photograph. And the issue comes when you have older cameras that you have to scale up your image to be able to fill up a medium-sized print, versus a newer camera or a higher resolution camera that you can possibly even downscale your images or have too many pixels to actually fit a medium-sized print. Now, professional printers will pretty much tell you that they want to have 300 pixels per inch for printing purposes for the highest quality. And so the best case scenario is you have 300 pixels per inch for that size, and you're not scaling up or anything like that. There are some little tricks that printers can use to take a lower resolution image and try to scale it up more naturally or to make it still look decent. But the end result, if you end up having less than 300 ppi, is that you pretty much end up with an image that doesn't look as good as it could have in a situation. The common thing that you'll hear in the industry is people saying, oh, don't worry about that. You just have to stand a little further back from the image. It will no longer look pixelated, that sort of thing. But as somebody who has been selling prints pretty much since around 2003, I'll tell you that if you have to tell a client, oh, don't worry, your print doesn't look bad, you just have to stand further back, I'll tell you that that just would not fly. Even if they had never seen another print before, or they didn't have another print to compare it against, people have differing levels of tolerance for image problems when they look at something like that, especially if they've had to pay money for that print. The other issue comes whenever you have people who buy prints and, for example, maybe you are doing an art show or art gallery of some sort. The issue comes when you're being compared against another photographer. If they can look at the print and tell that the image quality is better on the other photographer next door, they're going to often choose the other photo print as a better option just because the image looks better, not necessarily that they like that composition or design better. So I wanted to explain a little bit about my history in order to be able to basically convey my point of view here. And I will mention that I started out on 35mm film, and at that time, good 35mm prints were the de facto standard, and pretty much the low resolution digital images didn't look very good at the time, and so pretty much all professionals were still using film. And so I was an enthusiast at the time. I was just learning, and I would get film scans done of all of my images on low quality scans. And then if a client asked for a print, or if I found an image that I wanted to display at a show or something, then I would have a higher quality scan done, as well as having professional darkroom prints from the film negatives completed at that time. And so, there was a couple years of overlap where decent DSLRs had come out, but real professionals still weren't quite using those. But it didn't take very long for that situation to come to an end. So I wanted to talk about my first DSLR that I bought was a Nikon D40. That's a 6 megapixel DSLR. And when you're comparing digital cameras, it's important that you compare apples to apples. So for example, you cannot really compare a point and shoot megapixel count to a DSLR and vice versa. It's just not a fair comparison. So, there's a whole lot more to it than that. In using my upgrades on the Nikon DSLR lineup, you can get a more accurate apples to apples comparison of what resolution does for your images, as well as what role resolution can play as far as ISO noise and, things like that. So to start off, the first thing I wanted to mention is that I've had 4 Nikon DSLRs over the years, and basically each one jumped up in resolution every time. The only one that's been a full frame camera is my most current last camera here, and that's the Nikon D800, which was a 36 megapixel full frame camera. So I wanted to mention that every time I bought a camera, the usable high ISO has gone up every time without fail. This is not due to changes in the sensor size. This is due to changes in the architecture of the sensor, the way that the signal is processed, that sort of thing. So from the Nikon D40, maybe I could only use 800 ISO before it started to look bad. D7000 up from there, D500, you can get a good image up to 25,000, for example, on that camera. The D800 is an exception because I bought an older full frame camera, and you would have to compare it against the D810 and the D850 to get a more accurate idea of the ISO improvements on that range. So I'm not going to go into the full frame on that side. So I wanted to do a quick comparison for you guys, and I no longer have some of my old crop sensor cameras to compare for you guys to do a true apples to apples and with, photo examples and such. However, I did want to show you just a quick overview of the technical scores that you can see on the DxOMark website. Now, I'm a very practical person and I don't like to go by, lab testing results and things like that. However, I just wanted to show real quickly that the ISO range that you can use very well does go up from the D40 to the D7000 and to the D500. And that's despite the fact that the megapixel size increases. Now, you'll hear a lot of times in the photo community where people will say that that's not the case, that, higher megapixels cause more noise. That is not true in a completely empirical sense. I've also noticed that a lot of people will zoom in a lot further on the high resolution image in comparisons online. Not necessarily on purpose, but because the software will automatically do that when it sees more image information available. This often skews the results of the comparisons. On top of that, you can look at a medium-sized print example where something like a D500 file will often get scaled down in size, whereas the D40 would get scaled up, for example, and that makes any noise in the D40 more apparent, but also reduces the visibility of noise in the D500 files. Now I wanted to do a quick example of the two cameras that I actually still have left, and that would be the D500 and the D800. Now the D500 is supposed to get really good high ISO results, and compared to a crop sensor camera the same age as the D800, like say the D7000 for example, that is very much the case. The D7000 got pretty good results, but the D500 definitely improved on that a good bit in the high ISO department. And compared to the D800, I'm sure that you'll find a very similar thing happened up to the D810 and then the D850. But I wanted to give you a quick comparison anyway because, again, I'm not a very technical person, and I choose to go more with the real-world usage scenario, and I wanted to give you an example of that. So in this case, we're going to take the D800 that's, got high megapixels. Supposedly that should be causing me a little bit of an issue, but I'm going to compare it against the D500. And so what I'm going to do is the D500 with the crop body, I'm going to put a 50 millimeter 1.8 lens on it. And then I'm going to compare it against the D800 with a 80 millimeter lens on it. And that should give you a very similar field of view from one to the other. The aperture range is the same. And so you should get a very similar result. And so I set my settings for the scene on both of the images at 6400 ISO, that's 1/50th of a second, and f4. So both of the images are going to be very similar with slight difference in, the exact field of view. And you can pretty much ignore any differences in the, what I got in focus as well as the white balance and that sort of thing. All we're really looking at here is the noise comparison. So what I wanted to show you here is that you can get a very good, maybe even better to much better result using a camera that is older and so that and really is about the same size. So you can, for example, get an older camera like the D800 and save yourself some money on that, as well as get a very similar or even better photographic result, as long as your main focus is not in video production, for example. So I think it's helpful to take a look at this chart here of a comparison of the four cameras that I've owned by Nikon, and to see here the differences between them and how that really affects the image quality when you're talking about prints. So if you look here on the right, we have small, medium, large, extra large size prints. Small in my book here is what we all start out with, is pretty much an 8 by 12 inch print. Medium is like somewhere in the neighborhood of 12 by 18. A large 20 by 30, and extra large is like 40 by 60. And these are just general sizes, all in the 2 by 3 format. And of course your sizes may vary, especially if you're using metric, that sort of thing. But I just wanted to give a good starting point for reference, make it easy and clear and simple. So pretty much any modern camera can definitely do the 8 by 12 size. That's not a problem. If you jump up to 12 by 18, you start to have a little bit of an issue, being just slightly short of the 300 ppi suggestion that most professional printers will offer you. And you can print a little bit short of the ideal. The problem is that, you know, that slight degradation of quality may be apparent to you or someone else, maybe even a client or whoever bought the print, and especially if you have it next to other prints of a higher quality, you may be able to start to see the difference, and that can reflect badly on you. So if you take a look at the medium, you know, even the D7000 starts to fall behind a little bit. And so pretty much any camera from the last 5 years or so will work just fine for 12 by 18, no problem at all. They do have some little tricks at the printers and such to try to make this more or less apparent. And so, you know, it is possible to print larger. Like I said, I mean, I've even printed very large images from the D40, and as long as you're using like a more textured paper or like a canvas, you can get away with a little bit more, I think, than when you start printing on glossy material, that sort of thing. So, you know, it's where you start jump up to the large and extra large prints that you start to really see problems with the quality. The minimum quality suggested is about 150 ppi. The problem in my book is that, you know, I can see differences in quality between, you know, 100, 150, 250, up to, you know, the maximum visible resolution. So my point of view is that I always want to try to get as close to 300 dpi as possible, and if, you know, if it starts dropping down lower, you know, I'm going to start questioning whether or not I should provide a option of printing that size. So pretty much, you know, when a client requests a photo, I think back and think about which camera it was taken on, and I may restrict the print size based on that. So I think it might be important to you to also consider finding a standard of what you find as an acceptable size for, you know, the image that you have created, given the particular camera you may have shot it on, that sort of thing. So as you can see, when you look at the XL images, pretty much all modern cameras start to struggle there, unless you jump up to the newest, you know, 40, 50, 100 megapixel, you know, medium format style images. You start to have some issue getting to the best resolution. Now, you know, there is a little bit of leeway for, like I said, tricks that they can do at the printing places, as well as, you know, viewing distance. However, it's not something that you want to totally lean on, because you cannot control how far away people stand from your images. So that's something that I would suggest to you to do some test prints, see how they're going to turn out at different PPI. So to give an overview here, I just wanted to mention that pretty much everybody these days looks at an image on a phone, where any camera can take an image that will look good. A few people still look at images on computers or on TVs, Maybe they've interfaced their computer to a TV screen. That's very common now, and I find that, and I think that in 10 years' time, that will be even more common. TVs and computers will definitely merge. It's also very possible that, TV screens will grow, even larger than they are today, probably in the neighborhood of, full wall size, probably double what a lot of people have today. And they will often be higher resolution, like 8K style resolution TV screens, and probably the computer operating systems will go along with that as well. So you will need large images in the next 5 or 10 years to be able to accommodate those. Now, using the size chart that I showed here as a reference, when you start looking at, showing on large monitors, on 8K monitors, that sort of thing, you're going to find that you need some of these higher resolutions to be able to give adequate resolution on those type of devices. And in the future, there's probably going to be a lot more of those screens around, as well as it's quite possible that we're going to start using large projection, which will be requiring much larger images to have a more immersive experience. So, even the large and extra large sizes that I'm printing at today will seem small in comparison to what you need to really fill up your mind's eye for something like projection or virtual reality, for example. You're going to need very large images to be able to really fill up the user's view on something like virtual reality. So I think it's important not to get caught up in the way that you currently use your camera and what meets your needs currently, but also to consider, future-proofing your setup to some degree. Now, these are all decisions that we're going to have to make for ourselves based on our, goals and our, financial situation, etc. We all have to live with compromises and deal with, ideals. So, it's up to you to really decide how this fits into your life. But I would suggest you to try to avoid some of the mistakes I made where I didn't realize how important photography was going to be in my life later on. And you don't want to end up in the situation like me where you look back on your image library and maybe 30% of the images were taken on entry-level cameras that don't provide a good enough resolution to use for certain projects or to print certain sizes or to provide to a client or to submit to stock photography websites, that sort of thing. So you don't want to find yourself in that situation. If you can avoid it, it's really not a fun place to be. Especially when you look at, things like travel and landscape photography, where maybe you spend a whole lot of time and money traveling to some fancy destination, somewhere around the world. And, these are images that you cannot recreate. You cannot go back. Most of the investment is in the travel and the time itself to go out and take the images, and not so much in the gear. So if you can swing a little bit more to be more prepared for the future, it may be a good option for you. I noticed that there's a lot of brand ambassadors, especially for micro Four Thirds cameras, who purposely sort of muddy the waters on this kind of stuff to, keep in line with, what their, brand really wants them to say and do. It's my opinion that pretty much any camera is good for pretty much everyone if they're not doing even medium to large prints. If you start doing medium to large prints, that's where you're going to start to really have issues and need to consider upgrades and that sort of thing. Anyway, guys, I hope this video can help you. I look forward to some constructive conversations in the comments, and take care, guys.